There was like a weird post in the Washington Post where there was an opinion piece kind of poo-pooing the Epstein files. Also, Ezra Klein had a piece a few months ago about how, basically the Epstein files, I forget exactly.
He said that he thought that Epstein's
Here it is. Yeah.
Trafficking was a distinct enterprise from anything else.
It mostly didn't overlap.
Yeah, I'll read the sentence quickly. It's when he said on the episode, "If you force me to give my best guess, I think this guy had a lot of powerful friends and that he was a predator and a pedophile, and those sides of his life were mostly separate in terms of like basically his sexual perversion and predatory nature was separate from his powerful friends, where there is literally zero evidence to suggest that. And you have to think about how, I know Reid Hoffman, we don't know the extent of his relationship with Epstein, but his closeness with Ezra Klein likely plays a role in perhaps some of the motivated reasoning here. I'm not trying to be too conspiratorial, but I am trying to say that like there is about to be some circling of the wagons of a certain class of people on this front. Because like when we're talking about class solidarity amongst this very, very elite group of folks, they're implicated in it and they don't want it out there, or they don't want to set the precedent that this kind of activity could be subjected to sunlight. And I find it very fascinating that we see some of this kind of preemptive defensiveness from some of these papers and people high up in media.
This is to just further that point you're making. This is an excerpt from Yanis Varoufakis's Adults in the Room when he met with Larry Summers, and I can't remember the context in which he met, but. Larry Summers said to him at one point, "So Yanis," he said, okay, here it is. Larry started going, he says, "There are two kinds of politicians," he said, "insiders and outsiders." And I would imagine Larry Summers sees himself as an outsider, as a politician in this context. Really, policymakers, people in power. There are two kinds of politicians, he said, insiders and outsiders. The outsiders prioritize their freedom to speak their version of the truth. The price of their freedom is that they're ignored by the insiders who make important decisions. The insiders, for their part, follow a sacrosanct rule. Never turn against other insiders and never talk to outsiders about what insiders say or do. Their reward, access to inside information and a chance, though no guarantee, of influencing powerful people and outcomes. With that, Summers arrived at his question. "So, Yanis," he said, which of the two are you?" Yanis said, "By character, I'm a natural outsider," I began, "but I hasten to add, I'm prepared to strangle my character if that would help strike a new deal for Greece that gets our people out of debt prison." And Summers went on to say, fair enough. But that explanation of insiders and outsiders, I think there's a lot to learn from that. I mean, I think there are politicians who make the calculation that Varoufakis did in that moment to save Greece in his mind, which is I'm an outsider, but I can function as an insider. I'm willing to trade those things. That's something that comes up in our politics, I think, quite a bit with some of our faves, even. Mm-hmm. But but you can also see that in the context of someone like Ezra Klein, who I think there is value to him to have access. He clearly wants to influence a lot of these Democratic politicians as an insider. And sometimes that may, you make your decision there as to, how you're going to approach things. And people make that calculation. But also, then, of course, also the lesson that Larry Summers says is that, like, we protect our own. And so, if we're at the Epstein Island, and I see a political rival. All of a sudden, we're political rivals, but what we are together transcends that. We're elite in some fashion.
Yep.
And, David Dane and other folks have been going in. I think I saw Matt Slaughter tweet about it. Larry Summers' public role in politics should have got him run out of town years ago.
100%.
Exactly.
You don't need this information to know how odious Larry Summers is. Like, all the publicly available information about Larry Summers over the years, his perspective on women as president of Harvard, his perspective on Biden's administration on economic policy, his perspective on his promising that Barack Obama was going to bail out homeowners as a way of sort of like placating people prior to the election and policy fights. All of it should have been enough to get him jettisoned into space.
Yeah.
As far as like getting close to policymakers. But if it's the Epstein case that gets him away from students at Harvard and makes him toxic, keeps him out of like Project 2029 or whatever it is at the gets him off the board of the Center for American Progress.
You listening, Neera?
Now, Neera thinks I'm paid by the Republican Party, so she's probably not listening to this show.
She's an insane person.
Very insane. But
like, why? Like, these people are all still in the driver's seat.
Yeah. Recently, she said that, which I found interesting. She's waded back into Twitter. But the fact that this person is crafting policy for this like major think tank is just insane. I mean, these are all that whole class of Democrat from the Clinton era should be completely irrelevant at this point. I mean, they are, but they have institutional relevance, which is crazy to me. Sam, I'm curious just about your take on this one thing that I saw. I can't credit who made this point, but I think it's an interesting one. Is like why the Epstein case is capturing for younger people, like maybe younger than 40, outside of the salaciousness of it, of course, outside of the scandal. Some people, there's a point about like, is it a proxy for millennials or the younger generation and this older, bloated, elite class
100%.
of wealth hoarders who think, like, I mean, Larry Summers, who thinks he knows better, who is there just really to maintain an exploitive financial institution, like that the idea that these people continue getting away with everything, and that being a major divide in our politics even right now, I think is kind of, just as something to think about.
I think why did Trump's drain the swamp have such an allure? I mean, it had an allure to everyone, even if you were not a Trump supporter, because you didn't necessarily believe that he wasn't of the swamp. But the idea is that like there is we live in two Americas on some level, and the idea that there is a class of people, some form of aristocracy, it's usually demarcated by money in our society, for the most part it is, that lives with a second separate set of rules. I mean, this is not new to this era. It's just that it has more resonance now. Like if you go back and, look at like Glenn Greenwald was writing about this. Matt Taibbi was writing about this.
Not so much now.
No, not so much now. Chris Hayes was writing about fractal inequality at Davos.
Right.
15 years ago. There was a real sense in the wake of Occupy. And I will say, even in the buildup to Occupy, I mean, I remember sitting in the Current offices and saying to somebody in 2008, the head of Current at that time, the real issue is insiders versus outsiders. There was a real sense once, like, the internet became a vehicle for politics with a blogosphere. It was happening like that's what, Daily Kos and Netroots Nation for a period of time was about outsiders influencing politics from the insiders. And that divide has become in many ways like more poignant in that the insiders are like a smaller and more insulated group. And it is both, it tracks with age to some extent.
Right.
It's certainly money and class.
But to your point, but that point is, are you saying basically that the internet was like a vehicle for more outsiders to try to influence politics in that way? I'm just making sure because I wanted to kind of connect these things. Like, this is where the Democrats are such abysmal failures too, how did they miss this Epstein stuff? We were talking, Brian, off air the other day about how like many of the stuff we've heard for years, like about Trump and Epstein. I mean,
because the Clintons,
right?
It's because the Clintons are more implicated than Trump is.
But I mean, even in 2016, right? Like after Clinton was kind of obviously, she lost that election, like there was all of this information out there, and the Epstein case was capturing people on the internet. Like the fact that the Democrats couldn't understand that phenomenon, chose to ignore it essentially, and kind of enclose is also, I think, indicative of like what?
I think the reason why it's has salience now and didn't then is because the right was invested in it.
But the right was, I mean, like Epstein was all Alex Jones was talking about in the lead up to 2016. I mean, this was a real story at the time. Like, I mean,
the Republicans took all of the energy and sublimated into QAnon.
Yes, and so all I'm saying is that, like, I mean, when we're seeing how this party has missed the moment so repeatedly, the fact that they couldn't or chose actively not to capitalize on the wealth of material out there for Donald Trump shows exactly what the problem is that, there's a complete lack of feel for the national mood in terms of outsiders, insiders, etc.
Yeah, but I think that, like, I don't know that Epstein translated into that until there was pushback about releasing it. I mean, remember, like, he went to jail under the Biden administration.
No.
Excuse me, under Trump. I mean, he went to jail. He was already he was already dead by the time you get to the Biden administration.
Yes.
So, and he went to jail under the Trump administration, and so there wasn't this sense of like the guy's going to get away with it. And there wasn't a sense of like people are getting off because there was at least a perception of like, well, the guy's getting held to justice. There isn't, but
it's two things. One, I'm sorry.
It wasn't until the right though, because like we wouldn't cover it.
No, I know, but I mean, I think there's two things. One, this is not even the biggest point. I'm just trying to make sure my point is cogent. It's that, like, you have a Democratic Party that's constantly trying to appeal to a mainstream media headline kind of focused strategy. You talk about how Chuck Schumer always knows what's going to be on the front page of the New York Times. That's his like skill in terms of dealing with the media. That's what he talks about. They miss all of the internet stuff. They miss the blogs that you're talking about. They miss but that kind of alternative reaction brewing on the internet is indicative of what we're talking about here, where that is the outsider space where people are developing opinions that the party is just entirely missing, or interests, or that the institution of the Democratic Party is entirely missing. And so I do think it's connected in that way, in the fact that they couldn't understand or harness something like this.
I see.
And because they are pursuing this obsession with a suburban Republican and the professional class Democrat. The lack of willingness to wade into anything that would resemble conspiracism is a genuine problem for the party's brand, because it's not full conspiracism. You don't need to be talking about QAnon, but when you're talking about how the government is functioning and the institution works for you, and that there aren't these dark, nefarious forces behind the scenes, you stack the deck against you in the anti-establishment fight inherently.
I think conceptually, perceiving there to be some type of the Democrats brain that thinks about things is wrong. I think the difference is that I can just tell you any type of organized money was allergic to Air America because the money on the nominal left, and I'm using left in an extremely broad American version of it.
Okay.
That being, the Democratic Party and to the left of that. The big money there is completely allergic to populism because it is not, and it's decidedly not in their interest. The right was funding the hell out of these things because it was a way in which they had a right-wing populism, and even their right-wing populism actually benefited money. It was really more about nativism. So on the nominal left, you would not have funding, you would not grow. All these people were outsiders in the sense that they wouldn't even get advertising. You could barely even get unions to support blogs. On the right, the Mercers, the Foster Freezes, they're just dumping money into this stuff because they all had aligned interests insofar as we're going to cut taxes, we're going to get rid of government, so that's just going to unshackle our corporate endeavors. We're going to undermine labor rights, and then the argument is like, we outlaw contraception, or do we get rid of immigrants? Like that's the competitive spaces there. And they're just pumping money into there. And so the influences grow. I mean, the Koch brothers in 2012, was it, had an entire apparatus to compete with the Republican Party. The party itself became so weak. That's why Trump did so well, is because the RNC, as it were, completely was diminished in power because the Koch brothers put so much money in and created another, basically flattened everything. And so it's not that the Democrats didn't think about this in that way. It's just that the influences that existed there, it wasn't really like, why are like even politicians, contacting us to get on? It's because of what happened on the right. There's nothing organic that happened on the left that made them realize, we need to go with these people.
But what happened on the right was a deliberate strategy by Steve Bannon, in the sense that he
was part of it. The Mercers were supporting it. But
yeah, I know.
But you're kind of saying the same thing. I mean, the problem is the Democrats are allergic to any kind of populism. And to use a different example than Epstein, because I don't necessarily...
Well, the money's allergic to any type of populism, and the money is always going to influence the political decision.
Yeah, but look at the JFK assassination stuff, too. That should be a Democratic issue, and then Trump basically owned it for the Republicans somehow. And now you have people talking about JFK, it's Anna Paulina Luna, because this entire I think it is a professional class thing. The only people who think JFK wasn't killed as a result of a conspiracy are college educated white people.
Yep.
That's the only cohort in this country. And that's who the Democrats have decided to speak to. And that's why they have no sense of touch with actual how to be populists in America.
Matt is saying my point better than I did. That's really, in summary, what I'm trying to say there, basically.
Is just that there should be more. I think part of the problem is that, and not to defend the current crop of Democrats, but part of the problem is that how do you both maintain a faith in government and also entertain these things? And it's far more important, obviously, the Democrats to maintain a faith in government, because you're asking, in a perfect world, government is going to be providing everybody our health insurance, not just 1/3 of us through Medicaid and Medicare, but everybody. We're going to trust the government on a whole host of things. And so undermining government, and that's what the whole, anti-vax stuff was about. Undermining, it wasn't about corporations. Right? I mean, at the end of the day, because they certainly aren't taking it out on corporations. It was about undermining the government's ability to provide, public health and to control businesses and say, hey, wait a second, you can't force people to come in to your thing, or we're going to put restrictions on you. And so it's a much tougher sort of line to walk there when it comes to admitting government's failures. Now, I think the irony is that by not admitting the government's failures, I think you can go too far. You keep too many secrets, and things become too overly classified. And I do think that is a function of like a certain mentality that is really more bred, I think, like you mix sort of like some type of academics with high finance, which is what Larry Summers is, which is what Robert Rubin is, which is the entire sort of like financialization element of the Democrats that came in. You have masters of the universe sort of meets these sort of like academics, and all of a sudden they're like, well, we can't afford to cut in the people into this conversation.
Yeah. And I just think that there's a fine line between, you can, I think, really make a case that government programs and services can work for people, but also have a real acknowledgement of the fact that our national security state and policing and federal, like the very communities that the Democratic Party wants to have a corner on, like like Black people, people of color in this country have been impacted by the so-called deep state in a way that I think like we could have a little bit of a smarter approach in terms of dealing with it and not being so institutional. But we're splitting. We split this hair.
I also think it makes sense for the class of people you're talking about, Matt and Emma, to be less skeptical of the government because to be less skeptical of the elite because from a hierarchy standpoint, they've won.
Right.
And so, Barack Obama's optimism about America was very much like, hey, if I can make it, anybody can make it. And it's like, actually, no, dude.
Let me be clear, this rocks.
Yeah, I mean,
the world.
That was like, that gets back to that thing that Elliot Spitzer told me when he was half in the bag. He's like, Barack Obama believes these guys they actually know what they're talking about.
That was one of the most troubling Epstein email releases, is that Epstein said that Obama got in touch with Dershowitz to talk about Israel. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
You're calling out Dershowitz.
Wrong guy. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.